previous video showed you how to upload the .rmd file into RStudio Cloud and how to download the packages that we need to install the packages and knit a document. This video is going to show us a bit about the structure of the document as well as how to make small changes so that we can look at new information and tweak it for your purposes. So we will notice that up top here, anything that is code is in gray. And this always starts with these 3 quotation marks, a bracket, and then R. Then we have some information inside of that bracket and a close bracket. The gray chunk ends with just 3 quotation marks, and these are the quotation marks that are in the upper left corner of your keyboard. So they're not just the regular quotation marks that you would use if you were indicating a quote in something. So within the gray, our document always starts with a setup. So this is why it says setup inside here. And then these options are basically the libraries we need for the things that we will be doing. So now once we get into the white portion, this is what becomes our exposition. So if we have a hashtag here, it changes this to blue within the code, and this becomes a header. So when we knit this, the finding data is going to be larger because it will be a header for a section. And then I have some information here about what we're going to do. So I talked about how I found a .csv file. And then in another chunk of code, so these gray pieces are called chunks, I read in the CSV file that's at a certain URL, and then I give it the name COVID because I don't want to have to keep this huge chunk of code every time I use it. So I read in my data and then I give it the name COVID. So that's what this arrow, which is just a less than symbol and then a dash, is. So often we want to see what our data looks like. So then we have our head. And usually our data has far too much information for us to look at it all at once. This one has tens of thousands of lines of information, so we don't want to look at the whole thing, and this command head allows us to just look at the first 6 lines. And that's really all we need to look at to see some information about it. So we can see that we have our first variable is date, and then we can see the format for that date. And then we have state, and then some data quality grade. Then we have the variable death confirmed, and so on. And there's a whole lot of variables here, which is why this goes on and on and on, even though it's the same 6 lines. So down here at number 1, this is the information about the data in Alaska yesterday, because Alaska is AK. That was our first line. So we just couldn't fit it all horizontally, so it went down to the next line. So now we can see the format for our variables, and if we want to do some statistical information about it, we can decide which variables we want to work on. So we are using a file that is on the internet because this gives us dynamic data. We can see that I first made this file on October 14th. That was the date that shows up here. But when we just knit it, we have information about October 24th, which is yesterday. I'm making this video on October 25th. So this gives us super up-to-date information. By using this web URL, we get our dynamic information. So as we come down, we can see that if we want to make some graphs, then we're going to use our familiar ggplot that we've used before. But we're going to say, well, the data set now is called COVID. So I call the data COVID. And then if I want a line graph, I use geomLine. And I use this aesthetic, the AES that we've used before. to say that X is the date and Y is death and the variable death. And we want this colored by state. And two things to notice here. It tells you right in the file. We have to use this Y date and it will just be chaotic to look at. So in fact, if I erase the Y day here, we can knit this and see what happens without it. And the graph will be pretty hard to read because of that. So we come down to the graph we just made, and with this date information like this, we don't even get a graph because it doesn't know what to do with that kind of information. It's not written as a number or something we can put on our axis like that. So instead, we come here and we convert this to a number, and the command Y day just tells us the day of the year. So it takes this date and converts it into the day of the year, which means that now when we knit it, we'll have numbers there. So right, January 1 is the first day of the year, and so on. So we can see that there's no data over here from January because this pandemic really picked up in March. So the beginning of the year, there's nothing. And then we have all of this. We can also see that this does not work well because there are just too many states. And so we might want to filter some of our data. So filtering means that I'm just going to take our data and I'm going to say there are certain qualities I want to look at, and I want to just filter for those qualities. So in this example, the qualities I want here are just the New England states. So I'm going to filter my data set called COVID, and the way I'm going to filter it is I'm going to take the variable state, and any one that is in this list here of Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Maine, Connecticut, Vermont, Rhode Island, these are the ones I'm going to keep all of the information about that's in COVID, and I'm going to make a new data set, give it the name New England. So now I can plot my data using ggplot. I take the same exact code from above, and the only thing I change is I say data equals New England instead of data equals COVID, and when I do that, I get this smaller graph. So filtering is a really nice way of getting at some of the data without having to change our data set and look through it at all. Just say, these are the ones I want. We can also filter for other variables. So I'm going to jump down to this section here on standard deviation. And in this case, I have filtered for a date. So if I want to calculate some statistics on a particular date, I can filter for the and only pick all of the information from that. So instead of saying I only want these states, I'm saying, well, I want all the states, but I only want the date October 13th. And so I'm filtering my COVID data set, and I'm filtering it for dates that are exactly here. So in the previous one, I had a list of states that I was considering. Here, I just want this particular date. And then once I do that, this is a new data set. So I can use all of that same information that I have my ggplot, my different commands to calculate statistics, and now do it on October 13th. So in this example, I took the data for October 13th, and I wanted to look at the variable death, so I used $death. And I want to look at the summary information about that. So when I look at this, and here, rather than knitting, I will just look at this piece. So this is an error that could pop up. Because this here depends on information from a previous chunk. If I only run this chunk, it won't know what it's doing. So if you see this other triangle, if I hover over it, it says run all the chunks above. That way, the computer will know what COVID is. So it read in COVID, and we can see this showing up over here in our data. It read in COVID, it read in New England. We can now see how many units of observation each one of those have. And now if we run this chunk, it knows what these things are. So it will calculate our variables on October 13th. Finally, we're going to just show you what you need to do if you want to pick a different date. So we never want to be writing our own code, so I just copied that code, and now I'm going to paste it. So I copy this, I paste it, and now I want to alter it to what we're looking at. So for example, we're looking at October 24th is currently the most recent date that we have information on. So I just make a new data file called October 24th, and I create that by filtering my COVID data by this date. And then if I want to know the summary information about that, I change this to October 24th. And now when I run this chunk of code, I can see that both October 13th and October 24th over here on the right, it tells me I have 56 units of observation. That's because we have states, but we also have territories. So like Puerto Rico's in there and Guam and other U.S. territories. So that's why it's more than 50. So we just calculated all of these statistics super quickly by just copying and pasting and then adjusting to what we wanted. So if we wanted a different date, we could do that. If we wanted to know a particular state, we could copy and paste the code and maybe change it to the name Massachusetts, or just Mass to be short. And instead of date equals, we look at the state. And we want that to be MA. So if we don't have that list like we did before, and we just want to know about one state, we can do this. And then if we change all of this and run our chunk, we can see this third set just came up about the Massachusetts. And so that's how we can use filtering to look at just certain variables, or just look at certain examples of variables, like a certain date or a certain state, and run our statistics on that. So I hope this video was helpful for you, but definitely send me an email or stop by my office hours if you have any questions about this. Bye!